Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. John White, WebMD's Chief Medical Officer and host of the Spotlight On series from WebMD's Health Discovered podcast. For this special two-part episode, you'll hear up-close and personal journeys about being diagnosed with a rare type of cancer, multiple myeloma.
He looked at me. I have been his patient for more than 20 years. And he said, "This is really strange. You're an African American, age 57. I've never seen this before."
This back pain that you're continually having with no signs of osteoporosis.
No signs, exactly. And I didn't have any signs of osteoporosis in my family history.
Listen to Health Discovered on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I am the Proactive Caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. If you cannot take care of yourself, then you can't take care of your loved one. Caregiving is already an emotional challenge for all sorts of reasons, but the added crisis in the world today has added so much more fear, anxiety, and depression. It's affecting us more than ever before. And the numbers of caregivers in itself has risen by 10% in the U.S., spanning from ages across from 25 to 65 and up. From 42 million caregivers in 2015 to 53 million as of 2020, and that was prior to COVID. You can imagine the need for resources to do more than just survive is on the rise as well. It's kind of hard for me to talk about dementia without talking about depression. So, especially after sharing the information on our first two episodes this year on what is and the stages. And even though Mom was used to living a melancholy life, I wasn't. This kicked my caregiving journey into high gear. This is why I've asked Hannah Platt today to join me. Before I get into the details, though, please keep in mind this is strictly based on my personal experience caring for Mom, who lives with mixed dementia, and not at all intended to be medical advice or a replacement for seeking your own care or care for your loved ones. You're going to love Hannah. Hannah Platt owns a private practice in Round Rock, Texas, and specializes in working with adolescents and adults. She works with them on a range of issues spanning from mood disorders to healing from trauma. She is a certified dialectical behavioral therapist. She is also certified in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a leading trauma treatment. Hannah worked in mental health for over 15 years. She has helped thousands of individuals move through difficult and often overwhelming times in their lives until they are able to see hope once again, possibly even renegotiate their purpose in life. Her passion comes from navigating multiple crippling episodes of major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder throughout her middle school and high school. As a result, she wanted to understand more about mental health. Thanks for coming on with me today, Hannah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. It seems that we both had different reasons to draw us to understanding mental health, but nonetheless, that calling was there. What was it like for you in middle school and high school?
So it was, I kind of got sidetracked and it kind of hit me all of a sudden because up until middle school, I had sort of this, I would kind of consider idyllic childhood. I had amazing parents and everything was just great. I didn't know anything about depression. I didn't know anything about mental health. I didn't really need to at that point. And then I was diagnosed with a medical condition, and then sort of everything fell apart all of a sudden. So it was very situational. And all of a sudden, I didn't have as many friends. It was everything that I thought was my life sort of swept out from under me. And I started to experience depression, and it actually came in the form of anxiety first, which we often see, and then depression came later. And I didn't really have the language for that. I didn't know what that was. My parents had never had depression or struggled with it. So, I hadn't been prepped on that, and a lot of kids are not. And so I sort of had to figure all of that out, and along with my parents' support, but I started to go to a therapist and understand situational depression and anxiety and how to cope. And after that, I actually I was really interested in mental health and helping others. And so I went into what is called the Girls Empowerment Network in Austin, where in high school, I actually went to middle schools and visited with girls who were struggling with mental health and was a mentor, basically, and realized that there's, many, many girls at that time and in middle school were struggling with depression, anxiety, eating disorders. I mean, you name it. And so that just increased my passion for helping and my interest, and also noticing, okay, when they make these changes or when they understand that it's not shameful and what is going on, there's such immense room for healing, and they can change their whole lives when they understand that. So ever since then, haven't looked back, been interested in mental health since then, and went through college and grad school and everything. And I really enjoy it. It's a passion of mine.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I love that you had supportive parents and that they were willing and open. It's almost like parents who understand the need and the value of therapy aren't worried about seeking it for their children. Same thing with parents who know how to handle money well. They teach their children how to handle money well. So I'm glad you had that base. What kind of difference do you think that makes for children now, teenagers, having that supportive background?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's huge. If I think about my experience, if I had not had parents that were in tune with me at all, had parents where I couldn't share with them, or they weren't willing for some reason to get me help, I don't think I probably would have made it through that time period in my life. And so I find in my practice, I work a lot with teenagers and their families. And we see, I mean, it's clear in the research that if a teenager or just an individual has a support network, especially parents that are supportive, their prognosis is just, it's incredible, the difference between a prognosis to somebody who has that support system and someone who doesn't. Right. If you don't have that, it's very, very difficult to bounce back and to kind of progress through the depression.
Right. So when we talk in terms of the depression, and I mentioned earlier, the stats, COVID made a huge difference in everybody's life in one way or the other. But one of the things I pray that we get past this way of living, this COVID way of living sooner than later. But one of the things I want to try to understand is the difference between what clinical depression is versus the situational depression.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It is a difficult distinction sometimes. There are actually two different diagnoses, and technically in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, this is our sort of mental health Bible, essentially, with all of the disorders. They're completely different diagnoses in there. One is major depressive disorder, which is that clinical depression that we're talking about. And the other, what we kind of term situational depression, is actually the diagnosis of adjustment disorder with a depressed mood. So it means that this person who may have this diagnosis is struggling to adjust life after a stressor or something that has significantly changed the life that they thought they were having. we project forward what we expect our life to be like. We're often have goals and things, and if something really throws us in a completely different direction, we have a hard time finding equilibrium and getting back on our feet. And so when that happens, sometimes if there's a depressed mood, these signs of a situational depression, that's the diagnosis we would give, is an adjustment disorder with depressed mood. Now, a clinical depression is a little different. A lot of times that will seem to kind of come on for no reason. Will also tends to recur a lot more. There'll be more episodes of it. And it tends, not always, but it tends to be more severe with a clinical depression. And we tend to also need some sort of medication or something is often considered a part of that treatment. Right. Versus the more of a situational adjustment disorder. Depression is psychotherapy. Sometimes medication is indicated. Everybody's different. But a lot of times psychotherapy and lifestyle changes and certain things are what we look to in that case. So slightly different diagnoses.
Right. I know growing up, just kind of trying to be the kid growing up, but at the same time, having some sort of idea of mom and her depression. I knew from time to time that she had more so the clinical depression and that she was able to take medication for it. But the problem for her is she would reach a point where she felt great, and instead of acknowledging that the medication was working and treatment was doing what it was intended to do, she would say, I feel great, and quit the medication cold turkey. And cycles would just go. And it's like, it was really hard to understand that.
Yeah, we see that all the time. That is actually a very common thing. And I know I was actually guilty of that when I was struggling with depression. I had medications when I was in high school. We have this sort of, a lot of people have this, they don't want to be on the medication. They don't want to have to take that. Sometimes there's a shame involved. Sometimes it's, especially when we're feeling back to ourselves, it's so, I don't know, we want to move towards not taking that medication a lot of times. And unfortunately, it's hard to know whether you've really come out of the depression or the medications are working as they're supposed to. And now you are not depressed, but you still need the medications. And so, it is important to work with your prescribing doctor, a mental health practitioner, somebody to work that process with you, because I don't say, okay, just take them forever and don't test that out. It is important to see maybe you have actually gone into remission and you don't need the medication. But the problem is people try to manage that themselves, right? Rather than having a professional help guide them through that. So it's a really hard one when the depression has lifted to know exactly why and where that's coming from.
Right.
Yeah.
So
can understand her struggle there.
Yeah. And it was a struggle that she definitely lived for several years. I mean, I think that stigmatism that once people know that you have medication or you need this medication, it gives that stigmatism that something's wrong with you, something's broken. And, she did come from a background that her family was not supportive of therapy. I guess their generation
that adds
didn't.
a whole layer.
Yeah, and so that need to avoid, or the response to avoid reality, and so it didn't help.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, if you're surrounded by that idea that it's a failure in some way, that you have failed to cope, you've failed to be resilient, that this is your fault, it's going to be very difficult to not carry that around with you. That takes a lot of work, a lot of self-work, possibly in therapy to move past that.
And I didn't realize how deep her situation went until I became a caregiver. And so it made it really difficult to, find the moments to boost her mood for the day or boost her own morale. And I got frustrated, and then I started noticing my own personal depression started to take effect. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's so difficult when we're trying to manage the mood of somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, not only is it hard to manage our own moods and to do the things we know we're supposed to do to be in, to take care of ourselves, but now you're trying to do it with somebody else who, may not want you to do that and may be resentful or may feel, that they're losing their autonomy and push against that. And then so it's just such a struggle on all sides, I think, to navigate that.
Yes, of course, because now here it's her daughter trying to tell her. And I didn't approach it like you should be happy, you're still alive kind of thing. I definitely didn't take that approach. But inside, my mind absolutely went there several times. And so not being able to understand her depression and then feeling like I needed to avoid her at some times because I felt like if I got close, it was like this contagious thing that I would just get sucked into her depressive world. And when I started to experience my own depression, I was like, oh no, I'm going to be just like mom. Oh no, it's happening to me. And it was, it's almost like I kicked my own cycle of anxiety and further issues from that alone.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very difficult. I mean, especially if you're an empathetic person, if you tend towards being able to feel with somebody else. We know we have mirror neurons in our brains that help us to identify with people, which we need. That helps us be social and helps us to connect with others. But when you're connecting with somebody who is in the pit of depression, you then can get pulled into that pit with them and you want to support them, but you don't want to be completely in it as well, because then you cannot help them out if you're there just joining them. So it's a very difficult, it is a contagious thing because of those mirror neurons. If we're sitting with someone who's depressed and in close conversation with them for long enough, it is difficult. I mean, we have to, as therapists, we have to train very hard on how not to do that since we're sitting with depressed people for long periods of time. So, if you don't have that training, it's very, very hard not to fall into that as well.
That's interesting. And most caregivers are coming from definitely a situation where they don't have that type of training or even insight into it. So
absolutely.
As I continued to go through this with my mom, eventually there was a time period that my dad got sick and he passed away shortly thereafter. He had pneumonia. And within the year and a half of that time period, I went from this depression just kind of, at first it was something I kept telling myself, oh, it's just the moody blues. It's just that once a month hormonal thing. But then I got to this point where I was crying like as often as I could, but also trying to hide it. So, waiting for times to be home alone or in the shower or something. And then I got to the point where these tears and this constant crying turned into these myopic migraines. And I had no idea that it was possible. So when you mentioned you also work in trauma treatment, doing the eye movement, how is that? Is that something that kind of correlates to that? I mean, how does that work?
So with the bilateral stimulation, the eye movements, that is the trauma treatment. It was originally created with eye movements, but we now know that you can actually use any form of back and forth movement. So what we call bilateral stimulation, meaning there's something stimulating both sides of your body. So it doesn't have to be eye movements, and it doesn't necessarily, as far as I know, it doesn't relate necessarily to crying when you're upset, that it's not necessarily the same brain functions going on there. But we do know that there is neurological relief in a back and forth type of movement. So even things like taking a walk, part of the reason that is, it's not just getting outside. I mean, all of those things factor in are important, but that back and forth movement, both sides of your body being stimulated. We even see it with babies. If you tap or squeeze on one foot and then the other in sort of a certain movement pattern, it's calming to their nervous system. So that's part of that trauma treatment. And you can honestly, soothe yourself with that bilateral back and forth movement. We don't recommend doing your own trauma treatment with yourself because that brings up too much.
Right.
But you can do a soothing effect to going back and forth. But yeah, I don't know of any connection between that and crying with the eye movement.
I know that I had a grid that I have every now and again that I have to look at and do some eye exercises and make sure that my vision isn't changing. And it was just the scariest thing when one day I was sitting on the couch talking to my husband and all of a sudden my vision blurred, and it was like I felt like I was going blind. It was like, is something happening? What's going on? Am I having a stroke? And I can't tell, but it was definitely something that. And then once, of course, it came on soon, and then it went away, probably within about 45 minutes. But the stress, the moment of whatever was happening, the emotional stress that happened, I couldn't explain how it came on so quick and then disappeared.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that was very scary to not really know what was going on and not know what was triggering it. I think, what you described, we see a lot with people sort of talking themselves down, right? What you described with, well, is it hormonal? Well, maybe it's this. And I think there's a hopeful nature to that I hope it's, I'm scared that it's something bigger. And so I'm just going to kind of hope it's this. What we find though, is I get so excited when I get somebody who comes in and it's, they're in the mild levels of depression and they're noticing this and it just something feels a little off and they come in early. It's just like if let's say you have flu symptoms and you wait until it's, you've been in bed for 5 days and you can't even open your eyes. That's going to be harder to treat than if you were to go to the doctor at the first sign of the flu when you just first start coughing and getting. So same with depression. It's the exact same thing. If you can, before all the neurochemicals and neurotransmitters get really depleted or your cortisol levels increase, all these things we know go along with depression. If they're at the beginning of that, we can do lifestyle change. We can do a lot of different things that can relatively easily often put you back into remission and get you back to feeling like yourself. The problem is a lot of people try to talk themselves out of it and it continues to progress and get worse and worse until something kind of catastrophic happens or something really upsetting like what you described with your eyes, then they come in and it's harder to treat at that point because it's progressed into sort of moderate to severe depression levels.
Right.
So, if anybody listening sort of is starting to feel that way a little bit, that, you can always, just going into therapy doesn't mean you're going to be in therapy for years. You can go in, kind of get your tune up, get back on track, and it can all kind of be done versus, and this isn't the case for everybody, but for a lot of people, versus waiting for it to progress until it becomes a bigger situation for you. Yeah. But very common. Yeah.
Well, and that's where I've learned not to, that's still sometimes the go-to, but I've learned because I've accepted that therapy is good and I have been able to attend my own therapy sessions. I'm able to feel those differences and go, okay, it's time for that tune-up again, because I'm starting to feel this similar thing that started before and catch it before it gets any worse. So what are some of the symptoms the caregivers or our listeners can kind of be on the lookout for in terms of situational depression or clinical depression even?
Okay. So I will list out, there is quite a few. Now understand that it doesn't mean that you have to have all of these things to have situational depression, but I'm going to kind of list out all the different things. Everybody's a little different. You may have just a couple of these. You may have a large portion of these. Just sort of listen to the different things and kind of keep in mind, am I experiencing any of these at all? So the first one is feelings of sadness, that down feeling that it's hard to describe sadness, but I think everybody kind of knows in their own experience what that feels like for them. Feelings of hopelessness, that sense of it doesn't matter. It doesn't, I don't care to do anything about it because it's not going to change anything. Nothing's going to make it different. That what we would normally, people would say, oh, you're being really negative. Well, there's sort of a hopelessness that comes as a symptom of depression. Another one is loss of enjoyment in things you once considered to be enjoyable or pleasurable. So you love to go fishing or something like that, but now it just doesn't even feel worth it to get up and do those things. That's one of our big red flags of depression. Is just, and another piece of that is if you do go do this thing you once enjoyed, once you get there, you don't really enjoy it anymore. Like we call this anhedonia. You're not able to feel pleasure anymore. That's a big sign of depression. And once you've gotten to that place, you're usually kind of in a moderate level of depression. The next one is bouts of crying spells, like we were just talking about. Right. Especially if you're noticing kind of crying at what feels like nothing, or you're like, wow, that wouldn't have made me cry before, but now it is. That's sort of a sign. But what we do know too, though, is that mild to moderate levels of depression tend to have more crying. Once you get into severe depression and even clinical depression levels, then we tend to see people talk about, like, I can't even cry. I want to cry, but it's not happening. So that's a more progressed version. The next one is feelings of anxiety, nervousness, just that on edge. And I'll at some point get to why that is, but just that feeling that something's wrong and I don't even know what it is. I can't pinpoint it. I'm just anxious and I can't calm down. It's a big one. Impaired sleeping patterns. We know that serotonin, that neurotransmitter that is highly related with depression, is actually a building block and creates melatonin, which is that sleeping chemical. So if you're having impaired sleeping patterns, oftentimes that means there's some imbalances there in your neurochemicals. So it's highly related with depression to have struggles with your sleeping. Difficulty concentrating and paying attention. A lot of times if you're depressed, we think of depressed sort of looks like Eeyore, right? That sad, down, blah. When we look at brain scans of people who are depressed, things are heightened. There's a lot more thinking going on. And so people with depression actually realize, oh, wait, my mind is on overdrive. I look lethargic. I look like I can't, I'm exhausted, but I'm thinking constantly. And so when that happens, it's hard to pay attention to all these thoughts going on. They're probably pretty negative thoughts and upsetting thoughts, but all of those, and you're supposed to try to concentrate on something else, and there's not enough room. So difficulty concentrating is a big one. Feelings of being overwhelmed. I hear this from a lot of people who are depressed. The idea of just taking a shower, that's so hard. I can't do that. And so somebody who's not depressed doesn't understand that, right? They're like, let's go take a shower. But for a person who's depressed, that just feels so, it's too much. There's too many steps. Though the helplessness comes in there, like why even bother, that stuff. So if things that didn't used to overwhelm you start to feel hard, that is a sign that you're starting to move into depression. And if they feel so hard you're not even going to do them, then you may even be in that moderate level somewhere. Suicidal thoughts or behavior, common with depression. We know those things often go together. So if that's if you're at that level, you're usually at a moderate to severe level. And sometimes we just know you just get those thoughts and they kind of pop in. And if that starts to happen, it's definitely seeking therapy or reaching out is important. Some people feel shame with that and hide it, and it gets worse, and then go into an emergency level. We also see increased levels of anger, irritability, just things, I'm just annoyed. And I have a feeling that for a lot of caregivers, this is probably one. Yes. One that shows up a lot because you have a lot of sort of people that are going to get right there all the time. It's hard to keep your patience, but we find that with depression, it's even harder than normal to keep your patience. Things just really irk you, and it's hard to respond in a calm manner.
So true.
So if you're noticing, I'm just really edgy and irritated, that may be a sign. We see that one also. Depression in men looks a little different than depression in women often. Not always, but but a lot of times with men, we tend to see the anger, irritation a little bit more. So that maybe, some men say, well, I'm not any of the other things. I'm more irritated and angry. It can still be depression.
Right. They can't dismiss it at that point.
Yeah. Right. Another one is a kind of wanting to isolate. I just don't want to be around people. I know it will make me feel better. I know that once I do it, I'd be happy, but I just don't want to. And I just want to kind of be alone. And that isolation urge is a sign as well. We also get changes. I know this is a lot, so bear with me. A lot of different symptoms. But we also see physical symptoms increase: headaches, stomach aches, heart palpitations, just things that people weren't getting before, and their body is reacting to this depression and this change in neurochemicals. So we'll see that. And then changes in appetite is a big one as well. If you're just really not interested in food, you just don't want it. It sounds gross. Or that overeating. I'm going to eat to soothe myself. Comfort foods. I just want to eat all the time. So anything, a change in appetite is a big indicator as well. And then the last one's feeling exhausted, tired, just your body feels like it's just heavy all the time. That's a big indicator. Obviously, any one of these alone can indicate other things other than depression. But if you start to put all of these together and you're saying, oh, I have that. Oh, yep, that, you may be, maybe time to look at depression as a possibility.
Absolutely. I do remember times when Mom used to tell me, it's not what you're eating, it's what's eating at you. I thought, oh gosh, I heard that growing up so many times. But then as an adult, I look back and I'm going, as I'm stuffing my face with my burger and fries and having my chocolate chip, chase, that's my comfort food. Then I'm realizing, okay, it's something, that verse comes back in my head. What's eating at me? Why am I? Because it's something that as I eat it, I realize I shouldn't be eating this. I don't know why I'm eating this. It feels good. And then afterward, it doesn't feel so good.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and also if you have the type of depression where your dopamine levels are low, when we know that when we eat something that is, full of maybe fat, sugar, all of that stuff that tastes really good, it's going to release a bunch of dopamine, and then we feel good for a little bit. Now, eventually we don't anymore, but at least for a bit we feel better. So it makes sense.
Yeah. So are there people who are more prone to experiencing depression other than others? I mean, because growing up in a house that watching Mom, I was worried that I would be prone to it just because, but is it possible for others to be more prone to it?
Yes, absolutely. There's a bunch of things that factor into somebody being a little bit more prone to situational depression. Now, when we look at this doesn't mean that, you have to have all these things to be more prone to depression. Just consider that, you may have none of these factors that put you more at risk, but it's still situational depression. So it's not too black and white like that. Right. But we know that if somebody has a history of trauma, so they grew up potentially in a situation that was neglectful or went through repeated traumatic experiences, that's going to set you up. Now, I want to mention here that some people think trauma and think, oh, well, it has to be something really bad, like war or rape or something really, the things we think of with trauma. Actually, we look at it and there's things like bullying or being sick when you're growing up, all sorts of things that people dismiss but are actually very traumatic when they happen, especially if they're repeated over and over. So actually, if you have a trauma in your history, you're more likely to develop situational depression later on. We look at things like age. The older you get, the less prone you actually are to situational depression. Usually that has something to do with you develop your coping skills a little bit more. You have a little more sense for what your life is. You're a little more grounded in that. So age is a factor there. Pre-existing medical conditions or chronic medical conditions, especially with chronic pain. It's sort of like your plate's too full already with other things, and then you add something else, and you're more likely to just surpass your ability to cope. A family history of depression, like you mentioned, family history of depression actually does make you more likely and more at risk for developing depression, especially since there is sometimes a genetic component. So, and some of that is also social. Being around somebody who's depressed can make you a little more prone. So, and then any sort of abuse of alcohol, drugs, tobacco, something that's already going to kind of destabilize your nervous system is also going to make you more likely to develop situational depression, because your nervous system is already working hard at processing all of that stuff.
Right.
So it's a little more imbalanced. Another one is marital status. If you're divorced or separated, you're actually at a higher risk. It's a social support issue, and sort of having that partner is going to make it less likely actually for you to develop situational depression. And then the last one is gender. Women are just a little bit more prone. It doesn't, by no means does that mean that a man cannot get situational depression. Many men do, but women are slightly more prone.
Right.
So, yeah.
That makes sense. We're trying to balance many things in our life, and it
Right.
just drains us
Exactly.
emotionally.
Exactly. I also think, there's many factors that, and is a big one, as well as, I do think that men underreport, because I think that there's a lot of men that don't associate, they don't detect it. They don't go to the doctor about it. They don't mention it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So it may actually be more than what we think.
Oh, definitely. I think the way our society has raising boys, teaching them not to cry or to
Right.
suck it
Exactly.
up and be a man, that has negative effects later down the road.
Right. And often will lead to that irritability and anger look that we get a little bit more.
And the sad thing is,
but most people don't look at anger and say, "Oh, that's depression."
right. And that's the sad. And in addition to that, the sad thing is, not only are they not recognizing that as depression, but the person that is experiencing that doesn't have a level of sensitivity or consideration for their partner or sibling or friend that may be experiencing it.
Right. Absolutely. Yes, exactly. You're very right. Yeah.
So as we go through our caregiving days, and I don't want to limit it to just the caregivers, because this is obviously happening to many of us across the world now. As we go through our days, what are things that we can, I guess, do in addition to treatment? Let me rephrase that. Before someone is in psychotherapy or seeks therapy, what are things that they can do in addition to that or with it?
Well, one of the really great things with situational depression is that there's a huge lifestyle things you can do. It's very, very hopeful that, unlike with clinical depression or major depression, it's a little bit harder to treat through lifestyle. With situational depression, there's actually a lot of evidence and a lot of research showing that you can add in or take away a lot of things in your day to day that are going to help a lot. So the hard thing, I think, is that a lot of people tune out. They know, okay, eat healthy, get exercise, blah, 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 right? And they just sort of tune it out because they don't necessarily maybe understand exactly all the pieces, the factors and neurochemicals and why we're saying all of that stuff. But there are those things, and I'll go over some of them that you can be doing. Those things are the keys to re-regulating your nervous system and your neurochemicals and getting everything back on track. So I would say the number one thing, especially related to depression, because of what we know about the neurochemicals, is sleep. If your sleep is off, it's almost guaranteed that a lot of your other neurochemicals are off, because your melatonin is now off, which is going to create a serotonin change. All sorts of things are going to get out of whack. And so if you're, I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm scrolling on Instagram or whatever, and just sort of tuned out for a couple hours before bed, that kind of thing. All of that's going to impact your melatonin levels, make it hard for you to sleep. So making sure that you have a really good sleep routine around, a couple hours before you normally go to bed, making sure you're doing something that is soothing to your nervous system. So no screens, maybe a bath or a shower, and, doing maybe journaling, drinking some tea or something that's calming. I know I'm definitely guilty of the screens as well. It's a hard habit to break, but it is really important, especially if you're noticing some of these symptoms, to kind of hold yourself accountable and say, okay, I can do the screens, but I'm going to do them earlier. Right. And then I'm not going to do them within the 2 hours before bed. Another big thing with sleep is getting up and going outside. So our body is regulated based on light and sunlight. So especially right now when we're in these shorter days, a little less sun, if it is, you want to get up. And when you get up, don't get up 10 minutes before you got to get on your Zoom call and stare at a screen all day.
Right.
Going to create more depression. You want to get up maybe at least an hour before, do a slower morning routine, and we say at least 10 to 20 minutes of outside time in the morning, because then your body knows, oh, it's morning time. The sun is up, so it can regulate all of those chemicals and get you back on track. So, with any depression, I say make sure, even if you're not going on a walk, the walk is a little better because of the movement. But even if you just sit on your back porch or wherever in the sun for 20 minutes, that's going to be better than just staying inside. Our body can't figure out time if we do that. So it needs the sun to figure all of that out. So sleep is a huge, huge one. Another one is, like I said, what we talk about with food. If you're not eating the things needed to create serotonin and all of these neurochemicals that make you feel vital, then you can't make them. So, if we don't have the ingredients, it's not going to happen. So you want to be eating things, a meal that has a fiber component to it. Healthy fats are huge for brain health. So making sure you're getting your omega-3s through avocados, nuts, seeds, all of those things are going to help contribute. Vegetables, especially green leafy vegetables, are a huge component to creating those chemicals. So if you're just, eating junk food all day long, your body, no matter what you want, your body cannot create that, what it needs to create to regulate your nervous system. So I know it doesn't taste as good, but it is really important to make sure you get some of those. So even if it's slow changes, incremental, small changes, like you swap out, a little bit of avocado toast in the morning instead of a sugar cereal, that's going to matter a lot. So that's a big change. We also look at things like adding in things that make you happy. I know that sounds so simple. Oh, well, duh. But that does matter a lot for those neurochemicals. If you're only doing all the shoulds, the things you have to do, and you're just slogging through the day until you go to bed and then you get up and do it all again, you have no dopamine release. You don't have anything that's going to make you feel good. So adding in, I say, we all have, I think, 10 minutes at least a day, and trying to fill 10 minutes 2 times a day would be better, but at least one time, 10 minutes a day doing something that you enjoy is really important. As long as that's, something that's not going to backfire later, like, oh, well, but I'd enjoy eating this entire pizza. That's probably not.
It's going to backfire.
Right, exactly. So as long as it's something that doesn't backfire later, but you enjoy it, I'd say, making sure you're getting some of that in is also really important. Let's see, exercise, everybody knows this. It's a huge piece in what makes those chemicals as well. So I'm not talking about going to the gym for an hour. That's too much for most people, and especially for somebody who's experiencing depression. I'm just talking about movement and moving your body in some way. So if right now you're on the couch all day, or you're, in front of a screen and you're getting no movement, well, maybe it's just walking around the house and for an extra 10 minutes. So don't do something, don't go from nothing to the gym for an hour. You're going to quit.
Exactly.
Just one step up, right? And just move your body a little bit more. is going to be really important. So there's a lot of these just lifestyle factors that you have to look at. And I think we can all kind of be honest, hopefully, with ourselves and look at it. And most people can say, yeah, I could tune it up a little bit. I can kind of get myself together. And just, I do recommend kind of looking at your lifestyle, looking at your day-to-day, your average 24 hours, and just look at, okay, what's one small change I can make here? One little thing at a time is the way to create change. If you try to do it all at once, it just usually falls apart. So to trying to pick out some areas that may be your downfall right now.
I can absolutely agree with everything you just said. Years ago, when I started to experience this depression, the exercise was kind of my double-edged sword because I wanted to do it. I know I needed it, but then I did it to the extent that my body was so incredibly sore that I wouldn't return to the gym.
Right.
And so I couldn't create a routine that was something that helped me. Instead, it was hurting me.
Right.
And so finding those little bits of movement and improvement, it made a bigger difference. And even to the point where if I had to set a timer on my phone or watch the clock and set a microwave timer or something that would give me a straight 10 minutes and stop. So then I got to feel what that 10 minutes was like and how much, and then understand what all I could fit into that 10 minutes. And eventually working it up to 15 minutes and then 20 minutes. And if I had more, then I did more. But I had to train myself to do that. And the same thing with the food. Avocado toast is great. I mean, I can't get my teenager to eat it more often, but those are those simple things that make huge differences. Because once I started with the small supplemental things, like, okay, instead of a butter toast, I would have the avocado toast. And the feelings, the difference of how I felt after I ate was huge.
Yeah. Your body finally has what it needs.
Yes, and before
and it doesn't have all that extra stuff.
And before, when I used to say salads, I'm not a rabbit. I don't need to eat a bunch of salads. I don't have to be a rabbit to enjoy salads now. I've changed this, and it's been a gradual thing that I actually crave salads sometimes, and so I make sure I have it on hand to either eat it or freeze it for smoothies. So. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think one thing to consider is that depression and momentum are very related. If you think about, let's say, I'll use an example. I like to do stationary bicycles, so I'll just use one of those as an example. If you have the weight turned up on it and you have the resistance up high and you start to try to pedal from a stop, it's going to be very difficult, right? It's not going to get very far. It's going to be, and you're going to just want to quit. If you start lower resistance and you start pedaling and then turn up the weight, you've already got the momentum behind you. You can go a lot faster. It's not as hard. It's, everything is helping you move forward at that point. So a lot of people, when they try to make changes, it's like they've turned up the weight and they're starting from 0 and they want to go to 100. Well, it's not going to work. You're going to you're going to quit. It's not like you're saying, these small changes. Once you've got some momentum going, and I think this is important for people who are depressed, is okay, they tend to get an all or nothing mindset.
Right.
That's very black or white. It's perfect or it's awful. And so to really look at it and be like, no, I'm trying to get to here. I want to get to 20 minutes of exercise a day, but in order to do that, I'm going to start at 5 and then I'm going to add 5 minutes until I get there.
Exactly.
Then you start to build that momentum. You start to get some wins under your belt where you're like, yeah, I did that. Okay, good. And you can get those positive feelings of, feeling proud of yourself. And that will propel you forward into the next and the next and the next. So it's not, it's even, athletes or people that are doing all these things, they don't start from, just being great at it. It's very incremental change. And eventually you'll get there. One big thing, though, is that what I hear from a lot of people who are depressed is they do the thing, and that's this hard thing to do. Let's say it's 10 minutes of walking that they really don't want to do. And then I hear, yeah, but it was just 10 minutes, whatever, that I've had, there are other people that run for an hour.
Yeah.
And they immediately diminish the progress, which then does not give you momentum.
Right.
Because now you've just taken away all of the work you just did. So some things I do with my clients a lot is working on pride, letting yourself feel proud and not taking it all away from yourself. And during that process being like, yeah, I did the thing. That was hard for me, especially somebody with depression. It's often like they're carrying around, a rucksack, a military rucksack that's really heavy and full. So, and then they're comparing themselves to somebody who's not carrying that.
Right.
So remember, it's individual. You may be carrying a lot more. It's heavier because you're feeling depressed than that person who may be able to run for an hour. So you have to have some self-compassion is a big key here too.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that because I am guilty of that. I would see others and compare their mood or their happiness or success and diminish my own. And when I stopped comparing myself and giving myself credit for everything I was able to finally accomplish or that I was accomplishing it at all, it made more of a difference for me.
Yeah, absolutely. There's big tricks here. One other thing I want to mention with things you can do to just daily that don't necessarily involve psychotherapy. If you're not, there yet or don't feel like you're at that level, then we know that thought process is a big factor. Your thoughts are going to impact all these chemicals we're talking about. And so if you tend to be more pessimistic or you tend to fill in the unknowns with the stuff, we go through our days with a lot of unknowns. And a lot of times somebody with depression is going to fill in the blanks with something very negative or pessimistic or sort of catastrophizing is what we call it. Like things are going to be terrible. And so if you can catch yourself when you're doing that and just try to maybe even it's thinking about, okay, I can think about the negative, but let's weigh that out with also the positive. Okay, maybe there was at least one thing in your day that was even just okay. And starting to adjust your that will actually changes your brain when you do that, when you work to find the positive. I know for me, I have to sit and write it down. So every night I'll do a little bit of journaling and then I will list out 3 things that either I was proud of myself for that day, even if it was just little, or something that was relieving or just anything good that day at all. I mean, sometimes it's just tiny little things, but I can find them and I'll list them out and just have a little bit of gratitude. If you do that consistently, it will change your brain. Your brain starts to look for the positive instead of the negative.
I love that.
So we can sort of use that process to work against the depression.
Good. And sometimes it is the little things that make the big differences.
Absolutely. Yeah. Most days right now, with COVID, a lot of times it is the little things right now.
Right.
Right.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah, for sharing this information with us. I know there are many listeners out there, caregivers from all walks of life that will appreciate this. And
absolutely.
For those that are here in town, and how do they go about finding you in your practice?
Yeah, so I actually have a website. My website is www.hannah, which is HANNAH, Platt, PLATT, LPC.com. And if you go there, there is a section that says contact me. You can just email me through that. Or my phone number, which is 512-677-9859. And so you can reach me that way and just leave a message as well. Right now, most insurance companies and just most people are doing telehealth. So insurance companies will actually cover telehealth. And most, not every therapist, but most therapists are not actually meeting in person right now just for safety reasons. So even if you are not in town or you're in more of a rural area, you don't have access to as many therapists, now's a great time to reach out because you can get telehealth covered by your insurance. So, and it may not always be the case. So it's a great time to reach out even if you're not in the area. But those are the ways to reach me.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to either re-listen to this or you can actually visit the blog that covers this information. If you find yourself experiencing these possible symptoms of situational depression, then try to fight the obvious of downplaying it or diminishing it and actually seek therapy. Look into these other habits that she mentioned and explained with the helpful treatments outside of therapy. And then be honest with yourself and consider what needs to be changed in my life. How can I change it? And those little changes will make the bigger difference. So starting small, any way you can is the best, but just start. That's the most important. I hope this gave you more food for thought. And until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.
Mary redeemed a $50,000 cash prize playing Chumba Casino this year.
I was only playing for fun, so winning this was a dream come true.
Chumba Casino is America's #1 social casino experience. It's serious fun. With over 80 casino-style games to choose from, you too could win life-changing amounts of cash. Be like Mary. Log on to ChumbaCasino.com and give them a whirl. That's ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
The voice in the preceding commercial was not the actual voice of a winner.